Coming to you live, we'd like to welcome our viewers from the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good evening. My name is Jason Neiffer. I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the fabulous public state virtual school in the lovely state of Montana. And I'm joining you this evening from fabulous Missoula, Montana, where the weather's actually cooler today, but we have a massive wildfire about an hour south of Missoula. The last I heard this morning, I've not seen an update today, it is 0% contained with 4,000 acres charred and 14 houses already destroyed as part of this process, which is sadly becoming a standard a Montana way to have the state kind of light on fire during August. So it's not too smoky today in Missoula, but we expect it to kind of charcoal up here pretty soon. And joining me as usual is Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes.
Good evening, and I am so excited for you with the news of your committee, which of course we will not talk about in detail, but you can at least say that you're moving forward in your process. And I am the Director of Technology at Cassidy School in Oklahoma City, and the proud dad of 3 kids, including one who's college bound in a couple weeks. And we are not facing wildfires, but it is August and over 100 degrees. And today we actually bought a van from my parents that has a leather seat. And I realized that I will no longer park that van parked west because the seat was so hot when I got in it today at 4:30 that I basically could not touch my back to the chair. So that is Oklahoma in August. So I'm thankful we have good air conditioning, and yes, there's lots of blessings to count. So do your family or anybody you know have cabins in the danger zone or anything like that?
No, I know quite a few people that live in the broader area, and there is a large evacuation zone, but it sounds like, at least as of this morning, they were hopeful that the weather was going to help out today. So it is cooler tonight. It feels like there's a little more humidity in the air, which is cool, and no humidity is actually quite dangerous if there's wind, but hopefully the weather will help relieve things soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are broadcasting again through a Google Hangout, and for the first time, I'm pretty excited about this because I quickly read an article before we went live about how to activate a secondary channel, as this one is. We didn't set up a separate, Gmail, Google account. We just created the EdTech Situation Room YouTube channel as an extra channel. But anyway, we're able to go live directly. So this is going to be archived as a Hangout on air that will be on the channel. We want to transfer it. And for those of you that may not know, we have a website, edtechsr.com, and you can go to edtechsr.com/links and check out all of the articles, which we will be talking about, and probably some that we don't, because we tend to put more on the plate than we have time to cover in an hour show. But you can access all of our archived audio as well as video from that website and subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or other places like that. So you want to kick us off with one of your first articles tonight, Jason?
Sure. Let me start with a really interesting article that was actually released today, and it was a busy day today, and despite that, this article caught my eye too much so that I read the whole thing. But CNET has a really excellent article today called "Seeking Shelter with Phones in Hand, Refugees Stranded in Greece Tap Underground Networks to Find Safe Havens." And one of the things that is always of interest to me is how technology can impact situations that might have been extremely dire previous to now, but technology adds a new twist to things to connect people in different and nuanced ways. And this particular article talks about, first of all, the prevalence of cell phones amongst refugees in Greece. And of course, Greece, as part of the refugee crisis in Europe, took the brunt of a lot of the, especially later arriving refugees. And also, refugees have been labeled by other countries as, for whatever reason, legitimately or not, dangerous. And so there are a lot of folks hanging out in Greece from other areas, the broader Middle East, in some cases Syria. And the experience is a bit different because some of these folks, not all of them, but some of them have access to cellular telephones. Of course, Europe works a little differently than the United States does. And so the culture of buying cheap cell phones and then daily use SIM cards or pay-as-you-go SIM cards is a lot more common in Europe than it is in the United States. And so it's legitimate that you could have a cell phone that you purchased relatively expensively or perhaps picked up off someone used, buy a SIM card, and then do things with that, connect with others, make phone calls, etc. What came to mind here was a couple things. First, that many refugees were using these devices as a means of supporting networks, connecting with other refugees in the area, in some cases making connections that were able to share resources or send people in different directions. A lot of the refugee services in Greece are digitally applied for. They were talking about some of the strategies which worked and didn't work. For example, for a while, applying for refugee status required that you schedule an appointment via Skype to connect with a refugee specialist that could help you fill out the paperwork. That was all well and good, but they didn't have nearly enough staffing. So the networks quickly became overwhelmed with hundreds of people calling and getting effectively a busy signal. And if you hang up and try again, that congests the network even more. And then, of course, free Wi-Fi is a premium, more in Europe than it is in the United States. And as it turns out, Wi-Fi is not as available as you might think it in even a bigger city in the United States, where free Wi-Fi tends to be kind of a rite of passage of commerce, whereas in Greece, it's not the case at all. And so you could buy sometimes a one-day SIM card with unlimited data for $5 American, but that's an extraordinary amount of money for someone that is a refugee in Greece. And so there's probably not a lot of lessons for schools here other than attention social studies teachers. This is a great first day article to share with your students as you're returning back to school, to talk about the modern implications of things like technology as it relates to social studies topics. But it's always important to remember that in the United States, where we seem to be a bit obsessed with the occasional trivial as regards technology, witness our obsession the last few episodes with Pokemon Go, technology does have a real impact on our lives for certain, but certainly in the lives of folks that use technology as a critical tool for communication with others.
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about virtual reality and shared some links last time. And I tuned in to watch our president right after our last show, give his presentation. And I was able to, it was jumping around between these different cameras and panning around. To date, my favorite educational application of that technology has been a video called, and a movie, it's a documentary by the United Nations and another group called Clouds Over Sidra, and it's about Syrian refugees and trying to build empathy in the part of students and others for folks that are in refugee situations. And I think through that and some other related articles, it's amazing what cell phones can do for, the ability of refugees to stay in touch. Also, I'm thinking about natural disasters, whether it's an earthquake or, maybe even wildfire, things that are happening to large numbers of folks. Cell phones and the ability to stay in touch has really made a huge difference to where, somebody might have been out of touch for weeks or months.
Yep.
Now it can be, days or even hours. So, I guess I would say the educational connection is the huge relevance and importance of digital devices, and not ignoring digital devices in the classroom and pretending like, if we simply, do our traditional learning and prepare students to be critical thinkers, and even if we think about the most idealistic traditional education, somehow that we're fully doing our job if we just ignore technology and don't talk about the ways in which we, need to use it and navigate it. There certainly are hazards, but in the last a couple weeks, I've had some conversations with folks along these lines, and so anyway, I'm just thinking about how vital it is and how critical it is that we don't just assume that the world is full of digital natives who all know how to use these devices, and we don't need to do anything about it in school to help equip folks with the skills and knowledge to move out into the world. So
right. Well, and then I will also mention, I did not share the link this time because I want to look at the study in a little more detail, but my wife shared with me a study this morning that suggested that there is another digital divide growing in the way we're applying technology in the United States, in this case dealing with rich versus poor in regards to what the access to technology is, obviously, but what is happening on that technology, whereas those that are more affluent tend to access information resources and engage with others in social media. On the other side of the coin, those with less means tend to be focused more on games and interactions in that way. And I would say that and one of the reasons why I wanted some time to dig into the studies, I think there's a risk by making broad pronouncements there about what that might be about or what to do about that. But it does keep reaffirming for me what we argue almost every week, that you need to be having more experiences in your classrooms where students can practice technology use in a low risk environment, so that when things become higher risk environments, they're ready to go. And that's absolutely an obligation of school. And I think that's true of all students. But if you have some evidence that any subset of your students may need more access to those experiences, the classroom's an excellent place to do that.
Definitely. In fact, there's an article I was going to drop this one in, and I probably should if I'm going to mention it, but the article is talking about incomes and folks who have laptops in the home and who don't. And anyway, these are things that are dropped around in conversations about digital divides. My first article, and I went ahead and just moved this up on the list. So if you want to follow along with the links, you can go to edtechsr.com/links. Was an article today from Ars Technica. New attack steals social security numbers, email addresses, and more from HTTPS pages. And we have had this summer at school more security incidents involving Mac users than we ever have before, because basically we've had zero. I mean, Macs have just not been prone to malware and to viruses and things like that. This particular article talks about a vulnerability that came out at Black Hat, the notorious conference in Las Vegas, where hackers come together and share their bags of tricks, but also help raise our awareness about how we need to be safer. And this particular hack, which will hopefully be patched as these things get patched on folks who are upgrading with their security, allows the website to basically suck things out of your browser by just having essentially a widget or like an iframe that is somehow able to query, I guess, things that have been cached or saved. And reading the article, I don't know for sure if it is just a Windows vulnerability. That's probably actually a pretty significant thing to reassure people or whatever. But thinking about where we go in digital footprints and then how we get infected. I mean, literally, I'm not going to name any names to call people out, but I've had several faculty contact us as a technology department in a panic because of a flashing thing that appears on their screen, and they were afraid their system has been hijacked. The most egregious hack was, we think someone who, when they clicked update on their iOS device, really they were not clicking in the update section. It was a pop-up. And it resulted in over $2,000 in charges to their iTunes account. I don't know exactly how a hacker does that. If they have their own apps that they say, hey, repeatedly buy my in-app purchase, I haven't gotten that much detail. They did get it cleaned up with Apple, and it's taken care of. But she's very concerned about iOS updates. And having heard the story, I feel pretty confident that she wasn't clicking the iOS update button. It was a pop-up that was being seen somewhere else.
Right.
So this is, again, a recurring mantra that we are perhaps boring our viewers about and losing folks because they keep saying the same thing about security. But anyway, wearing the IT director hat, as I've mentioned before, I feel responsible for bringing this kind of news. It's like you're the prophet of the bad news, but trying to encourage everybody to be more secure. And the teacher who had the $2,000 hack also, I visited with her about two-step security, because that's something you can do to protect your Apple ID and your Google account. We don't have it turned on the school account, but she was very hesitant. Well, that'll be tough and that'll be cumbersome, and saying, well, how was that $2,000 hack? I mean, we I think I'm on the edge of probably fully implementing the password scenario, which is that all of us need to be using different complex passwords on every single website, and
Right.
and I'll admit, and hopefully not open myself up to a hack, to the thousands of viewers that I'm sure are hanging on our every word. There are some places that I use the same password. So
Right.
anyway, that caught my attention, and definitely follows along on other themes that we've talked about before regarding security from a personal standpoint as well as a school standpoint.
Great, thanks, Wes. And I'd add one other note about the notion of, for those of you that are tech savvy in the world, you owe it to your friends and family to help serve as that kind of digital Sherpa to help folks understand what hacks are and help them battle it. And I'll say even something from a kind of someone who supports a lot of members of my family. You also have to work hard to not be intimidating when you do that too. Don't judge people for sometimes mistakes that they make. Ask them to ask you when they're confused about those pieces, and help them build a better kind of judgment perspective related to those pieces, because it is a real issue, and the attacks are only going to increase in number and complexity over time. So it's important to be ready for those things.
I found the article. It's actually, I'd put this other one in there, and this is a little old. This is November 2015. The CNN article is titled "Teens Spend a Mind-Boggling 9 Hours a Day Using Social Media." But the quote that got my attention was, 54% of teens in houses making less than $35,000 a year have a laptop in the home versus 92% of teens in households making more than $100,000. So, a clear digital divide that we have in terms of access and the things that come with access, both positive and negative.
Okay, next, Recode reports that in a recent study by TechPinions, there was a study apparently done that says that when there's a collaborative paper, millennials prefer to use Google Docs, which I'm sure is not a surprise to anyone listening to this podcast. But the more surprising statistic is when they are working on something by themselves, only 12% of millennials defer to Google Docs. And for those projects, they move back to the desktop Word application. And honestly, this statistic floored me, because I wouldn't have guessed it to be true. And one of the reasons why that's the case is because, to be honest, I don't open Word unless I absolutely have to. There are good reasons to still open Excel for me. There are good reasons to open PowerPoint, in my opinion, although that's becoming less and less now that Google Slides is becoming more functional and easier to create nice, beautiful, simple slides. But the statistic there is the fact that millennials do go back and forth pretty easily between the desktop app and the web-based app. And if given a choice that where collaboration is not required, they would defer back to the desktop app. So it certainly doesn't mimic my experience, but now that I think about it, I rarely support students in context of my day job at the Digital Academy that are using Google Docs as an individual user unless they absolutely have to. More of our students would prefer to use WordPad on an old version of Windows than see Google Docs as a standalone word processor. What are your thoughts about this, Wes?
We've got faculty that remain committed to Microsoft Word and really want to keep students in Word in part because of, thinking about theses and maybe dissertations or just formal college writing that is going to require the use of, special tools for MLA or Turabian or what APA, whatever kinds of formatting that they're doing. It's an important thing to be able to move between environments. I think that it's important for us not to just be stuck in one mode and that this is what we've used, and somehow having it in our mind that, it still exists, that the world uses Word, so that's the only thing that we should be using. And for instance, a Chromebook is useless to me because we can't run Word on it. But I'm interested in what, what schools are doing as far as helping teach the use of the tool. And I don't know, maybe it's something we should be tracking at our school. I mean, we've been talking about metrics for use and getting beyond the how many times has the cart been checked out and the lab been used, but what are we doing? And especially as we're, I think, starting our 5th year as a Google Apps campus, it would be pretty interesting to take a look at some things in terms of the self-selected use of the tool, not just when a teacher assigns and says, hey, I want you to do this in this environment. I think it's still transformative to use a collaborative Google document to have teachers work on a document together, in a meeting. We did that with a free open source program called Etherpad. We used a website called TitanPad that hosts it. I like it because it gives everybody their own color. It has a separate spot over on the side where you can have a sort of off-topic chat. And it has a play button, so you can play back the entire creation of the document and see how it was built and who created it, and have a visibility to the interaction that has happened that you simply don't have with really any other tool. Even with Google Docs and revision history, there's not a play button that lets everybody, be in a different color and play back. So just last week in an iPad Media Camp I led, showing that, that led to good conversations about, well, why would we use this, versus Google Docs? But I still don't see that, at least in my environment, as quote normal, where we're seeing the collaborative power of we're on the same document at the same time, looking at this work together and editing it, now. And so anyway, I think that we're still, I don't know what the right word of saying this, but we're still the inheriting the world of the past, or we're still, it's baby duck syndrome, where we have tools that we're comfortable with, they've been imprinted on us, and we still tend to gravitate to those. So I think it's incumbent upon librarians and media specialists, upon technology coaches, and those of us involved in technology support, to continue to encourage folks to step beyond their own experience, to see the transformative power of tools that allow us to do things we couldn't do before. And I really got this from Ben Wilkoff in Denver at the Google Summit last summer, where he was just using that for his entire breakout session at the conference, but building a document together on the screen as we had conversations with teachers. And I've done a lot of that, but having 50 teachers together building that document together, it was a simple idea, but it was a powerful idea. It made an impact on me as somebody who's used a lot of interactive writing tools. And I think that same kind of experience, can happen for any of our next staff meetings when we have those. So.
Right. Well, and a couple thoughts broadly about the notion of adopting down to a single tool. I'm obviously not exclusively on Google Docs, and I have some specific reason for that. By the way, I am writing my dissertation on Google Docs. So I'll probably end up writing a blog post about this, and I'm going to share a tool tonight in the Geek of the Week that's really allowed me to transform the way I do citations. But I love it. Like the fact that, and as you know, Wes, and our loyal listener knows, I really have a lot of laptops because I like going from laptop to laptop to laptop. And part of what allows me to do that is that I can sign into my Google account and get access to my document anywhere. And literally, as I've worked on my dissertation in the last, I guess the writing component, 12 weeks, I've been able to go in and out of the document no matter what computer I'm sitting at with all my work there. But tech-savvy users really aren't stuck on one tool. And in fact, more often than not, and in fact, that's part of the point that I think that the study was making, is that tech-savvy folks tend to pick the tool that's right for the job every time. It's the same reason why that although I am a Chrome user, I often have Firefox and Safari in the Mac open, or Edge browser on Windows 10, because there are some sites that work better in other browsers. And rather being frustrated by that, I'll effortlessly move in and out of different browsers because it fits the way I'm working. And I think most tech-savvy users tend to be a little more multi-platform in the way they approach things. And I think we should teach that to students too, that, that there is no really one right way to do this. And sometimes student learning that they're doing it the wrong way is quite illustrative. My most recent experience with that is, again, supporting students as part of the Digital Academy. We have had a student that attempted to do something that we would advise against, which is to complete assignments on a cell phone. It's one thing to access things to read and watch. That's quite usable on a cell phone. But if you're constructing actual documents, that's going to become tiresome to you, even if you have, Microsoft Word on cell phones is really great now. Google Docs has always been really great on cell phones. But it's just not going to be a great user experience. And so, locking students into one platform, I think, also comes with disadvantages. When administrators ask me the question, should I buy iPads or Chromebooks or laptops, I say yes. Like you really need all three, I think, and not three for every student, but if you have some Chromebooks and some iPads and some laptops and maybe a couple of throwaway digital cameras and a diversity of devices is really going to allow you to be the most flexible. I understand districts that standardize on Chromebooks, for example, but ideally it's all devices that provide that perspective. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Yep, and I won't disclose names, but I've had some interesting discussions recently about those topics, and we tend to fall into our one size fits all. Let's find the tool for everybody, kind of trap. And I think as we're seeing the continued commoditization of devices and the elevation of capabilities. I was just listening to the Committed podcast, one of my favorite weekly tech show podcasts, and they were talking about this, that, it's just going to continue to put pressure on Apple as far as the prices that they're charging. And it also, begs questions about BYOD and whether or not we need to say things like everybody has to have this.
Right.
I will say, and I was trying to pull it up, Scrivener is a wonderful, powerful tool that I've used for writing that has just been on the iOS and Windows platforms and now has come to iOS. And so, we've heard these kind of outlier stories about, woman in Japan writes entire novel on cell phone, commuting to work for, months on the train or something like that. I think that we need to, it also thinking about what we're doing and the quality of what we're doing. I don't know. I'm still not a complete fan of saying, just bring your device, whatever it is, because it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. I mean, if you're showing up with your Kindle, even if it's your Kindle Fire, or
right.
You're showing up with your, your cell phone, and we're going to try to do some intensive writing, it's going to be a challenge. So anyway, I think it's it would be interesting to see how different IT departments are navigating that idea. I remember the start of the Web 2.0 revolution. We had I was in Missouri, we had some sessions on what do you support and how many things, and departments that would say these are the only tools that we're going to let you use for wikis because we can't know them all. I don't know. It's sort of, I don't know if there's a dilemma. I don't know a word for that. The pioneer dilemma. You can have perhaps too many people trying too many different things.
Right.
And it's important to be looking at the literacy skills that we're developing and how we cultivate those, and then how we're sending students forward with those kinds of skills. So anyway, we're having those kind of conversations at school, and hopefully we'll get some faculty input on those kind of things, because we need to be at a point where it's less haphazard, and it's not just pioneers trying different tools, but there's some core competencies that we're identifying, and we're supporting environments for using certain things for collaboration, and and then students are coming to teachers more equipped with the knowledge and ability to use these tools. So we're not having to teach the tools. We're having to, we're getting to discuss the ideas and use them, much like air or water in the atmosphere or the pool. We don't want to be teaching about the air. We want to just be breathing it and then having a conversation about something else.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay,
well,
where'd you next? Let's
see. I was flipping around between my channels here and lost my spot. Let's talk about the DNA revolution. Have you, before I talk about the article, have you read much or gotten in much to genomics and talking about DNA sequencing and any of that stuff?
I've casually read about it.
Yeah, well, this is an article from National Geographic. I'm a lifetime member of the society, thanks to my alma mater. And anyway, just really enjoy their articles. It's always amazing on the iPad, especially how how it elevates the bar of what's possible with journalism.
Yes.
But this is an article called How the DNA Revolution is Changing Us. And it's talking about these do-it-yourself kits. There's one called CRISPR, which you can literally just order online, and you can start altering the DNA of some different things. We're not talking about, complex organisms with the DIY thing, but for instance, we're hearing about the Zika virus, and so there is potential for scientists to be able to change some of the sequence of DNA in these mosquitoes, and then put those into the population so that the progeny of today's mosquitoes are not going to have that Zika virus, and the world would be saved from this terrible virus. The immediacy of how this is real, that this is not science fiction. You can freaking literally order a kit for, I don't know, it's like $100 or $150 or something. It's not like thousands of dollars to do some of this. We've always, and I say always, we've historically done things with genetic manipulation. Think about dogs and how relatively quickly in history, modern dog breeds happened. I'm fascinated by that. And I'm not a biologist or a geneticist, but there was a book that I listened to, and my outboard brain, my device, has my past articles. So this is a book called The Industries of the Future by Alec Ross, and I probably had that as a Geek of the Week during one of our early episodes. But anyway, genomics is one of the big topics that he says is going to be a huge industry of the future, and there are going to be issues and things that we potentially will face in terms of our own health and the health of family members. Certainly those that are considering, having children and things like that. But I don't know. It's something we need to find ways to bring these things to the attention of our kids. Like, being involved in genomics and that whole industry of the future is going to involve a sizable high school commitment, probably to science and to chemistry and probably some math. And, in order to be set up to move into that area, you're gonna need to be moving in that direction in high school. So I don't know. It's a pretty amazing article. National Geographic always blows my mind, and I think there are some. This last week at the iPad Media Camp was awesome. Well, maybe it was the week before, and I already said this. We had a truck driver, guy who teaches truck driving. We had a guy who teaches culinary skills and knife skills. We had a bunch of nurses. We had a lot of vocational, high school folks, which was really cool. And this group was very oriented towards careers. And I don't know the degree to which we're oriented in that way outside of our tech centers and our schools that have nursing programs and have these other kinds of, career path opportunities. And I'm thinking about that for my own kids too. We're not medical doctors. My wife and I are not nurses. We don't have that kind of a background. Thankfully, our son has enjoyed chemistry a lot, and our daughter is a junior, and she's taken her second chemistry class. So, I've been visiting lately with people about job shadowing opportunities, or how do you help kids learn about those pathways and then get excited about it to think about pursuing it as a path. So if you're not aware of genomics and not aware of what's going on with DNA sequencing, again, that'd be an exciting sort of thing to talk about at school, because there's a lot of ethical sides to this. Right. It's not just look at the technology and how cool it is. There's also the, wow, is this something we should do? And where is the line, if there is a line, to the manipulation that we should do and the unintended consequences that can happen? Because rest assured, there are places, and they have some pictures of dogs in China, I think, that they've like doubled the muscle mass of these beagles or something. They're like very, Arnold beagles, I don't know. That seems like a little bit superfluous, and okay, that's just kind of funny, but it's not not quite as serious as when we think about playing with the human genome and what we might do, or what people or militaries or secret agencies might be contemplating and doing now too. So
one of the shout out, if you haven't, it's worth going to your iPad and buying just even a single issue of National Geographic. to see how wonderful that application is. And it really takes the magazine, the traditional magazine, and elevates it quite dramatically to something very different and wonderful. And they, in my mind, were one of the first traditional publications to really do that. So that's an excellent resource that if you haven't had the chance to experience on a beautiful iPad screen, now is the time to do it.
And the last shout out I'd say about that is people like Alec Ross, who wrote this Industries of the Future book. I have put a bunch of what I would call STEM innovation folks on Twitter into a Twitter list, and I'll add that. And absolutely one of my favorite things to have on Flipboard, the social media and news app that every tablet and smartphone user should be using, which is free, is this Twitter list. And so whenever I'm wanting a little sip of innovation for STEM type issues, that's the Twitter list that I go to. And it's an amazing day, right? Being able to have access to these high quality, traditionally published articles like National Geographic, and then being able to tap into individuals that just are passionate about these topics and wanting to share about them, makes for some very exciting reading and some the power of connected learning. Absolutely.
I shared a link this week that is a review of the new Amazon low-end Amazon Kindle at CNET. It's still low-end Kindle. It's still not bad. It's still well under $100. And I mentioned this week not just because Kindle still remains one of the greatest, cheapest platforms for getting a good quality ebook reader. But I want to talk a little bit about the status of ebooks in 2016. And I still remember very well I can't remember if it was 2010 or 2011, maybe it was a little earlier, 2009, but there was one year at the Consumer Electronics Show, CES in Las Vegas, where it was ebook mania, and that hundreds of manufacturers were rushing to release ebooks or ebook readers, and there was going to be cheap ebook readers and obviously expensive ebook readers. And for those of you that are unaware of the history of the Kindle, the first generation of Kindle included an ebook reader and then a super large ebook reader that was a little larger than the size of a traditional piece of notebook paper. That was a wonderful screen and a great user experience to read PDFs and other formatted documents. And here we are in 2016, and I have to say I use my Kindle daily. It's how I read most of the formal, long-form fiction and nonfiction that I read, but I don't read newspapers on it, even though I am able to access the New York Times on my Kindle. And then I'm always super interested in the fact that everyone's running around talking about how ebooks could be the future to fix things like textbooks, and yet interesting study earlier this year that 92% of college students prefer print books to ebooks, and I'll put that link in the show notes. It's from the LA Times. The ebook itself seems to be of still fairly limited adoption when it comes to, first, younger folks, and second, a lot of really super readers seem to also prefer the paper book. So I guess probably to start with, Wes, are you an ebook reader?
I am a little bit, but I'm really an audio consumer. I mean, that is the absolute number one way I consume long form literature, mostly nonfiction, but some fiction. When I went camping with the family this summer, there's a book, I don't know who recommended it. It's called The White Plague, and it's actually a interesting bioterror story of somebody who concocts a weapon that kills women. And anyway, I'm about halfway through it, but honestly, I don't know how much I've even cracked it since we've been back from vacation. So I do read a lot electronically, but it tends to be more, short sips and articles from different places, Flipboard being one of my main sources. And, it's about Audible, even though my commute has gone from basically 30 minutes one way to 7 minutes. Our daughter goes down to the theater, about 30 minutes downtown. I find myself being able to not all the time, every moment, but a lot of time in the car, flipping on a book and finishing books. So I'm an Audible consumer, but you're a Kindle reader, right? I mean, you're using your Kindle constantly. So that's pretty. When did that habit take hold?
I first bought a Kindle. It would have been 2010, and my original reason why the Kindle was so attractive to me was not necessarily new books, although I do have a large collection now that I share with a friend actually, that were related according to Amazon, and we've long time shared an account, and so we buy a lot of things that we share and loan to one another. But I originally was interested in the Kindle as a means to downloading classic books that were in the public domain. And so I read a lot of Jane Austen's work that way, for example, that I had read some of it in college and high school and wanted to jump back into it and review some of those books again. And that just seemed to be the easiest, cheapest way to do that. But since then, there's two things that I really like that make it a compelling platform for me. The first one is I do like the fact that there's so much. Particularly, I'm a science fiction reader. I'm not a traditional science fiction reader. I don't like a lot of fantasy stuff, and I tend to focus on some particular themes in science fiction. I mentioned this, and I sound like I'm kind of a dork, but I like post-apocalyptic fiction, as it turns out. So,
as do many folks, and actually, the psychological explanation for that can be pretty fascinating of why that's taken hold in our society.
Yeah. So apparently, my paranoia runs supreme in my fiction choices, but a lot of that literature, and one of the most heartwarming stories I heard when Amazon first started allowing people to publish direct to Kindle as part of their digital publishing program, was that all these science fiction writers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that had published small distribution books, in some cases hundreds or thousands of editions. They rarely sold outside of trade shows and science fiction fairs. And of course, they, unlike a lot of other authors that had accidentally signed away their digital rights when they signed book contracts, most of the science fiction presses didn't care. I mean, they signed really informal contracts, and basically, once we print these 1,000 books and get our profit out of it, we don't care about your book anymore, so keep it. And so all these, in some cases, really well-known cult figures in science fiction started publishing their books on the Kindle platform, and some of them were bringing in some cases thousands of dollars a month in royalties as they started getting a cult following again. And the notion of the long tail, that the availability of products to bigger audiences allows you to serve smaller niches while still turning a profit, that's alive and well in the Amazon book world. But I think that's an amazing thing. The second thing that is really great is I do read quite a few books that were never going to get published, that they were not ready for prime time. Some cases, short stories are great that way. A lot of works from educational technology folks never made it to a formal printing press, and yet I can buy those books on the Kindle platform. In some cases, not very expensively, $2-3 a book, and call it good. I'm also super interested in the fact that ebooks go on sale all the time. Like a lot of bestsellers will have, a week where it goes from $9.99 or $12.99 to 99 cents for a couple days, and so I can kind of stock up. And as a traveler, nothing beats the Kindle. You can carry 1,000 books with you, and in a space just a little bit larger than your smartphone.
So something else that fascinates me, and I use this as an excuse to buy, was before the Kindle Paperwhite or whatever came out, so this doesn't have backlighting, but my now late friend, Bob Sprankle, really felt that the Kindle just didn't have the digital distraction that the iPad and other tablets offer. And I think that is really a fascinating thing. I had a conversation this week with one of our high school teachers who wants to order and buy clickers. And of course, I was suggesting, and our librarian was too, different alternatives that students can use their devices and learned. Actually, we have our smartboard license. That's good for two more years. And there's a built-in tool now with smartboard software that lets students use their device. You don't have to buy the smart responders, which I didn't know. But this faculty member or teacher is concerned about kids being on social media and doing other things. So what has your experience with the Kindle been? Has that been a significant benefit, Jason, that you're not tempted to jump over to Twitter or jump over to Facebook or something else like that?
Yeah, that's very legitimate for me. And in fact, and I think we may have talked about this in a past episode, something that I've been very committed to in the last particularly year or so. And in fact, I teach a really great session about this at conferences. And by the way, you can hire me, knifer.com, to teach something in your district. One of the things that I've been really focused on is making meaningful decisions about when technology should be around and when it shouldn't be. And so I work really hard. I'm not great at it. And if my wife were here, she would probably roll her eyes at me because she knows that I struggle with this. But I don't want cell phones in my bedroom. I want there to be no technology other than a paper book and maybe a Kindle in my room. And that's one of the reasons why is that if there is a browser on the Kindle, it's awful and not very useful. And, there's 1,000 reasons why you could say that, having it on a more functional device would be great, looking stuff up, going to the Wikipedia, yada, yada, yada. But for my trashy, EMP or post-EMP, no electricity world, science fiction, apocalyptic novel, I know what an EMP is, so now I can just enjoy society falling apart because there's no electricity. So, I think that's a very important point.
Okay, I have to ask you this, and we're going to kind of go down perhaps a rabbit hole with it. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we won't do this too long. But have you read Lights Out by Ted Koppel? Are you familiar with this?
I'm not.
Yes. So Ted Koppel has a book called Lights Out. And of course, Ted Koppel, one of the probably most recognized authority anchors of evening news. And this book is about the huge risk that we now have and that we are just living under for cyber attack and the opportunities that nefarious parties, whether they be ones that are not nation states or they are nation states, have to potentially cripple the United States and the world with cyber attacks. So, and that would specifically hit our electrical grid. I got this from my parents in part because they tell a story. There are these folks that are called preppers, and like back in the Y2K time, with folks thinking that the world was going to end because we weren't ready for the year 2000. There's a really great story about a guy who lives outside of Powell, Wyoming, where my dad grew up. Anyway, this was so disturbing, my parents had to stop listening to it. So I gave that to him. And it is one of those things that just, I don't know. I mean, my grandmother in her later years watched CNN constantly and listened to Art Bell back in the day. And, it's when you're going to turn on a constant news stream of media, as well as folks that are rather conspiratorial about things, you can certainly, depress yourself quite a bit. But anyway, that might be something to check out. And there's a book that is a novel that was mentioned several times in this, which is a novel about cyber attack and that kind of stuff. So on a personal note, we should all be prepared for short-term emergencies, right? Whether it's a blackout caused by ice in the middle of the winter, or we have some other kind of natural disaster, tornadoes, things like that hit. It's a lot more difficult to prepare for something that would last weeks or months. And I'm not wanting to depress people or send anybody, to a therapist because they've read one of the books that we recommended. But anyway, it's post-apocalyptic literature is we'll have to take that on as a topic, because the chair of our English department, who's now the head of our upper school, he's teaching a whole course again this year with post-apocalyptic literature for high school students. It's the seminar. So I'll get his book list. And we had a pretty fascinating discussion in April when we drove down to San Antonio to an arts festival together about, why is it that so many people are into that genre and zombie movies? And I'll have to go back and maybe even ask him about it because he had some theories. And I'm sure you probably have some theories too. But we don't have to pursue that for the rest of the podcast if you don't want to.
And I would also note that I went to that the Koppel book on Amazon, and one of the recommended books, people also bought the book I'm currently reading about an EMP. So that's
what book is that? What's the name?
It's called 1 Second After. It's about a town in the Carolinas that basically has it happens, no connection with the outside, cars all die, no electricity, no communication. And it's, I mean, I know of an EMP. It's not a uncommon concept for me. Part of it was being a debater.
Nuclear scenarios would always be what you wanted to go for. So.
Yeah, an impact scenario that involves the end of all electricity temporarily. I do know that from my understanding of the scientific nature of it, that particular book overplayed a bit how it would probably work. Like it was a little more. It wouldn't be as bad as the scenario suggested, but it did highlight, I think, quite correctly how reliant we are on, and I'm going to use the word technology here, and again, that's another rabbit hole for us to talk about, but like our food, it needs refrigeration, and our medicines are never stockpiled. They always come in to the pharmacy, twice a week by truck, and lots of interesting pieces there. But certainly an interesting topic.
Well, we'll tackle that at some greater length, possibly down the road. So I'll close that thought by saying perhaps down the road, when we end up moving. I mean, I've thought with solar power and solar energy, and our son wanting to be an engineer. It'd be what a fun maker project to put solar panels on our house and think about going off of the grid. That's definitely beyond my geek quotient. But hey, we have the internet and YouTube, right? There's a lot of things we can learn to do, and we can also outsource things. So who knows? I'm hopeful that we're going to see the continued advance of the green energy revolution in our lifetimes. So what about some Geeks of the Week? Do you want to share yours first?
Yes, I'd love to. As I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a dissertation right now. It's going to turn out to be a very large document that I'm doing completely in Google Docs. And I finally found a wonderful means of tracking my APA citations. It's called Paperpile. It is a plugin for Google Docs, and there's a free version and there's a premium version. Almost immediately after starting to use the app, I did spring for the premium version, and I honestly cannot remember what I paid for it, and I'm looking and I can't find the information, but it was quite reasonable. 10 years ago, I guess 15 years ago, Lord, I did a master's degree program online, and I used Noodle Tools, which I believe is a tool that's still around to manage my citations. It was wonderful. It allowed my, at that point, MLA to be spot on, and I never received docs for those particular pieces and was always complimented on my works cited page. Well, the same thing is happening now. There's some nuances that I need to learn to make sure that it formatted things correctly with multiple references to the same citation. Once I learned it, it's allowed me to easily manage. I'm now up to 75 citations in my master document, and I can store PDFs of the articles. I can have it automatically pull articles when it comes from a formalized database. It's a wonderful, wonderful system for tracking citations, and you can utilize Trabian, MLA, APA, all the major Chicago citation styles. All the major citation styles are available there, and it plugs just directly into Google Docs. And I think where this is going to become interesting, as you mentioned earlier, Wes, that there are people that say that you have to be able to use Microsoft Word, to be able to do some of the complex formatting. Of course, I think about that and I laugh because I do remember the day where people were arguing that word processors would never be able to do the proper formatting, which was why we need to have typewriters.
Isn't that funny? That's hilarious.
And now have moved on quite a bit from that. But Paperpiles is an excellent Google Docs plugin, and it will really make citations a breeze.
Good. I used BibMe, BIBME.com, and I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I mean, I tried some different ones, but that was my. No, was it EasyBib? I guess I should know that. It's been a while, but completely. There were some. What's the purchase one? Have you looked at that software that you can get that was expensive?
Oh, the one that's like an
plugs
app
into
you
Word.
install. Yeah,
it plugs into Word.
Super expensive, like BibX or something.
It's really expensive. Don't need that. So yeah, I think EasyBib maybe is what I did. I'll have to log in and see because it saves them all. But it was a lifesaver. So yeah, opening up our minds to the power of technology. It's sort of like the calculator. One of my favorite stories to tell from my dad. He was on the faculty of the Air Force Academy in 72, 73, and it was on the math department's committee that looked at whether they should adopt the calculator or stick with the slide rule, and they decided to stick with the slide rule another year, and that kind of thinking about hesitation. It's, we need to be thoughtful and not just just leap in. But when it comes to things like using tools that powerfully help us, not spend so much time on the freaking works cited page, right? I mean, that shouldn't be the purpose of research, is to get all our periods and dots right. It should be to properly attribute our ideas and then talk about our ideas. That's really, it can be the tail wagging the dog. So yeah. I'm glad to know about that. And those are going to be, conversations that we'll, I'm sure, have with our faculty as we're talking about research and papers and how those things can work and should work. So my Geek of the Week is a router, and it is from a company called pfSense, pfsense.org. And I'll give a couple shout outs. Jason has had an experience here recently upgrading some home networking hardware that's made a positive difference for him as far as throughput and just performance. I am now an IT director, so looking at upgrading our firewall, and we researched all these kind of things. And I've been wanting some of the power that I have at work at home, and so the Security Now podcast, which is part of the Twit network, is one of the places I've learned probably the most about networking and network security. They had mentioned this, and a friend of, it's actually the younger brother of a high school classmate of mine who is a white hat and is a really, incredibly smart person when it comes to web security. I had shared a couple different possibilities with him, and he had said this was the one he'd go with. So it's the SG22, 2220. What is that? I don't know how to say that fast. Anyway, it's a $300 security gateway that you would put on your home network, and still plug your access point and your cable modem into. But I don't have it yet. It's on my wish list, and security is an important thing. And
yes,
there's a lot of devices out there that have been sold on the market that are increasingly vulnerable. And just like, we're seeing reports all the time about hacks. Part of the way that folks are getting information and doing nefarious things is, they're not only getting our devices when we're out and about at coffee shops and things, but they're always probing the networks and trying to see what is vulnerable. So it's a good idea to periodically be upgrading your hardware, not to just use that same Wi-Fi router that you have had in the house for 10 years. You can update your security software. That's probably a very small percentage of people that, flash their firmware on whatever device that they have. But anyway, I'm going to be exploring that and seeing, what kinds of things that offers. And if anybody else has experiences, because the pfSense runs an open source, I should have said that, runs an open source software that works as a firewall. So it runs a customized distribution of FreeBSD specifically tailored for use as a firewall and router that's managed through a web interface. So that's the Geek of the Week.
Yep, and whenever you mention BSD, the geek is getting out. So that's geeky time.
That's right. Well, I think we are not afraid to hide our geek here on the EdTech Situation Room. So, okay, we got to do one quick oblique fact. Maybe there's a better name for this corner than the oblique fact. But I'll share a quick one for travel. You talked about travel. One of the highlights of travel of my life last year, and by the way, the oblique fact is something that is not supposed to be straight about technology. It's just another fact. In the summer of 1990, I got a chance to travel to Peru and to go to Machu Picchu, and that was one of these places taking Spanish that you saw this poster on the wall of a lot of Spanish classrooms and the Incan village that was, founded on the top of some mountains in the Andes. So pretty cool to be able to visit that. And also that's just an amazing mystical place. I've seen some pretty cool documentaries on Netflix since then about how they're still trying to figure out how they worked irrigation and, how the Inca did everything that they did to put their folks up there. So that is your oblique fact about Wes, or whatever story.
Well, I will say that one of the other topics that's dominating my life, other than my academic work and my day job, is that I am a gardener in Montana, and my wife and I. This is the first time we've had an opportunity to have a garden in our home for a couple years. We'd lived in a house previously for a few years that didn't have an opportunity for a garden, so we had a community garden plot. But my tomatoes have finally appeared this week. They were big, bushy, beautiful plants, and we do work hard at organic gardening and not cheating as my dad sometimes does with the Miracle-Gro, although he does have beautiful corn. And I come from both sides of my family. My grandfather, my mom's dad, had an acre big garden when my mom, who was the oldest of 11 kids, was growing up, where they grew most of the fresh vegetables for their family in that garden until he died in his 80s. He was still out there every day, tending to his garden and his massive size garden. And our tomatoes finally appeared this week. And so I was a little scared that we had overwatered because they were big and bushy, but with no blossoms on there. And 2 weeks ago, blossoms appeared. And this morning I went out and there was tons of little tiny green tomatoes that will grow big and wonderful. And then at some point, like every gardener experiences, I will have too many tomatoes. So that will, just like my zucchini is on the verge of being to where I'm gonna have to start sneaking them into the neighbor's kitchen because I'll have so much of it. But I love this time of year. I love gardening, and it's a great part of being in Montana.
Awesome. So if you've stuck with us for our whole show, you now know what a wonderfully well-rounded person Jason is and how he is preparing for the perhaps post-apocalyptic future. And we'll be tuning in later to hear him probably talk about the chickens that he's adding to his repertoire and, figuring out how he's going to get rid of all the surplus eggs that are going to come from the Nifer home. So.
Don't say that too loudly, because my wife would love to get chickens. So
well, there you go. The self-sufficient, it'll be interesting. It's almost a Luddite thing, but sometimes people that are very into technology, end up gravitating to things. And I actually have a lot of affinity for thinking about, I don't know, there's a romantic side of that, right? Gardening can really be tough stuff, especially when it comes to bugs and lots of labor and things. Yeah, so.
True.
All right. Well, thanks if you've stuck with us. And we will be hopefully coming to you again next week. Are you traveling at all in the next couple of weeks, or?
No, I may have a trip for a small family trip to go to Portland to see some family there, but I think I'm going to likely stay a couple of car trips in Montana, but I'm going to stay in Big Sky Country. What about you, Wes?
Sounds good. I'm hanging around here too. We got to get ready for the start of school here in a couple of weeks. So if anybody has a suggestion for a guest, we might try to pull a guest on here. We haven't done that in a while, but over and out from Oklahoma, and we'll tune in with you all soon.
Great. Have a great night.